Welcome everyone to the Sexual Reproductive Justice Now Dialogue, a call to action at 2 years at the ICPD Plus 25 Nairobi Summit. I'm Sonali Silva, I'm a SheDecides champion and a 25 by 25 ICPD young leader from Sri Lanka. And I'm also the hostess with the mostest, and I have the pleasure to chair this event. ICPD is very close to my heart, as just like ICPD, I was born in 1994. And when we discuss, plus 25, plus 2, what we're really talking about is, my childhood, my adolescence, and you're going to hear from other young activists. And I speak in the collective voice when I say that our lives, our potential, and our access to opportunities could have and would have been different had the ICPD promises been kept. So our advocacy and keeping ICPD alive at country level is so deeply personal to me and other young leaders that you're going to hear from. And of course, the young leaders that are watching. Speaking of our participants, we wanted to make this event as inclusive as possible. The event will be live interpreted in French, Spanish, Arabic, and International Sign. The instructions on how to switch language should be in the chat right about now. And you should find a little logo of a globe, and you click on that and select the language of your choice. I'm also very excited to announce that we will be having a very talented artist with us, Ipsita Davidi, who will be graphically recording the event. And I'll definitely pop in and check with her how the artwork is going throughout the event. Hi, Ipsita, if you could just give us a wave. As you know, SRHR is core to living healthy lives and well-being. And yet it seems to be sort of separate from the overall discussions that are present in the moment in the world at the moment. I'm going to struggle a bit. This is a very personal topic to me, so if I cry, bear with me. It's considered separate to our goals of universal health coverage and gender equality. And without sexual reproductive justice, I feel that none of these goals would be achieved. And it's been frustrating to watch sexual reproductive justice on the back burner. And I struggle to find the words to describe it and describe how I feel as a young activist. So I'm going to call on someone who is an incredible spoken word artist, and I guarantee you that she's going to express what I feel as a young activist and what we all feel in a much more eloquent way than I ever could. So I would like to start off our session with a poem from the spoken word artist, the incredible Zuhura the African Lioness. Over to you, Zuhura.
We have a song inside. It's always been by our side, even when our tongues are tied. We still hear our hearts cry. Take back your voice. Take back your choice. Take back the flame. Light up your way. They have kept our needs at the edges of our lips and our reach at arm's length where they planted the seeds of boundaries. It's funny how they think they know where we're meant to go, what roles we should take, what pace to make our steps when they have never walked in our shoes. Funny how they think they can speak the language of our bodies as if they've ever shared our suffering of watching our dreams die in the boundaries they have kept, drowning in oceans of promises never met, as if they'd know what it's like to be denied what it's yours by right, to be told you're too young to know what's best, and watch as your voice is muffled into whispery cries, as if they would know, as if they would ever know. For years, we have walked with a blind system. We have walked in the dark, turning victim, but we have seen enough pain, endured enough shame. It is time to take back the flame and light our own way, to end this endless searching for where to fit, for when to speak, for when to be seen, for how to exist. We want to choose our own journeys and walk our own walk. Our bodies, our destinies, walk our own walk. Walk where our future is bright and clear, where our voices do not fall into deaf ears, where none are left behind in the boundaries they have kept and drowning in oceans of promises never met. Let us take back the flame and light our way to change. Let us march with pride, march our way to change. 'Cause we have a voice inside, and it's always been by our side. Even when our tongues are tied, we still hear our hearts cry.
Wow, thank you so much, Zuhura. Did I not tell you guys that she would do this much more eloquently than I ever could? Thank you so much for finding the words for me and all other young activists. We have been marching. We have been marching to realize ICPD for as long as I can remember and as long as I started my activism. And this really was something I came face to face with in 2019. And I wasn't the only one. Over 8,300 people from 172 countries and territories gathered at the Nairobi Summit. And we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the landmark program of action that was adopted in 1994 at the International Conference on Population Development, ICPD, in Cairo. Participants from government, civil society, businesses, and more represented over 1,300 commitments that were accompanied by the Nairobi Summit with 12 core global commitments to achieve ICPD's goal for everyone, everywhere. That sounds like a lot, and I'm sure it is a lot, and I feel like it's our responsibility now to check in and see how's things going, what's been happening. And that is exactly the role of the Independent High-Level Commission on the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25. They've been tasked with submitting periodic reports to monitor this progress. Sexual and Reproductive Justice Now will discuss the first report published by the High-Level Commission of the Nairobi Summit in December 2021. This event will be in two parts. So the first part, we're going to speak on two specific issues that emerge. We're going to analyze it more in detail as key international examples of what is holding back SRHR and what can we do to take it forward. The second part, which I'm a little bit biased towards, because we're going to be hearing from SheDecides 25 into 25 young advocates, and they have the opportunity to speak to the high-level commissioners and address their burning questions. Denmark has been one of the co-conveners of the Nairobi Summit, together with Kenya, and has been actively involved in mobilizing political support for ICPD since it began. And it is thanks to this commitment that we are here today. So I'm honored to introduce Ambassador Martin Herman, the ambassador of Denmark to the United Nations in New York, who will give us the opening remarks. Over to you, Ambassador Martin.
Thank you so much, Sonali, and I also want to say thank you to Zuhura. No, what an amazing way to open this. But ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, partners, and friends, I really want to start by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you are in the world. I think COVID-19 has been a terrible ordeal and continues to be a terrible ordeal across the world, but it has taught us, the powers of new technology that can actually bring us together across the world. And I hope that's one of the things that we are going to bring with us into the post-pandemic world that we are all sort of trying to get into. I'm really, really happy to be here today together with you, distinguished ICPD high-level commissioners, but more importantly, young leaders like Sonali, Zuhura, and others. Now, it's been a little over 2 years since Kenya, Denmark, and UNFPA proudly hosted the landmark Nairobi Summit on ICPD plus 25. And we have come a long way. And we've done so together. But I think it's also abundantly clear that we still have a lot of work ahead of us to achieve gender equality and SRHR for all. So we must keep the momentum to some extent of the summit going and ensure that we follow through on the more than, as Sonali said, 1,300 commitments made in Nairobi, and we must do so collectively and individually. And I want to thank the High-Level Commission for pointing to some of the areas where we should do better. I also want to thank IPPF for organizing today's event and for your effort to take stock of and more importantly, follow up on the Nairobi Summit and on the high-level Commission's report. Now, I hope that today's event will inspire us to think outside the box a little bit, to reflect on how we can accelerate and scale our efforts. I think it's an opportunity to remind ourselves that while it is important that we hold each other to account, we must also reflect on how we can each do better individually. And I can't help think, Sonali, know that as one of the young SheDecides champions, to think that the SheDecides movement, came out of new challenges emerging on the scene. There was a response, and so I think it's important to look at this, to reflect on how we can each do better individually when faced with challenges. And I think that's whether we are government, donor, civil society, private sector, or any one of the many actors who actually met in Nairobi and pledged to make a difference. And I think today is an opportunity to remember that not a single one of us has the power to make the journey on our own, but that we would only get there together. No, to some extent, we carry both the opportunity and the responsibility together. And where we see challenges, we must then respond with reinvigorated effort. I think it's an occasion to reflect on how we can increase the crowd, if you like, of those that are committed to this, how we can engage even more non-traditional partners in our efforts to promote sexual and reproductive health and rights for all, no matter where they are. So how do we work with all to ensure that we actually implement the Nairobi commitments, and how do we make sure that our efforts work in tandem with other processes? Now, for our part, the Danish government has followed up on our Nairobi Summit commitments by increasing funding for organizations working for women and girls' health, rights, and education. But of course, we can always do more and do better. And rest assured, we remain committed to fulfilling the ICPD agenda, not alone, but together with all of you. Now, one final point, and perhaps the one which I find the most encouraging. I am really, really thrilled that we have such outstanding young leaders with us today. Sonali, Zuhura, Christine, Gisela, and Monica, you are the future today. That needs to bring home ICPD. And at the end of the day, you are, and you must continue to be, a central driving force to bring the promises of Nairobi to reality. So thank you to all of you for listening, but more importantly, for the work that you do. You are the difference. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Martin. Thank you for the glowing, recommendation and recognition of the work that we've been doing. I think I 100% agree with you. Everyone has an essential role to be playing, and meaningful youth engagement is really a part of the work that is yet to be done. Now I'd like to invite and introduce you to the Executive Director of ODI, Sarah Pantaliano, one of the high-level commissioners who will be giving us an overview of the ICPD Plus 25 High-Level Commission report. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sonali. So as you mentioned yourself, in November 2019, more than 8,300 people from 170 countries gathered in Nairobi because they wanted to finally realize the promises of the landmark conference of 1994, which 25 years later were still unmet. So the high-level commission was set up to track progress on the 12 global commitments that were agreed in Nairobi. So as you say, I have the privilege to serve on the high-level commissions, and I do that with some exceptional colleagues, some of whom are here today with us. We are an independent advisory body that's made of very strong, passionate, committed individuals from all kinds of backgrounds, experiences, perspectives from all over the world. But there is one thing that binds us. I think we all realize that we can no longer wait to make rights and choices a reality for everyone. We are expected as a commission to report annually on the gains and gaps, of the Nairobi Summit, and to make sure that, in the words of Natalia Kanem, the UNFPA Executive Director, that promises made are promises kept. So this report is our first report, and I think it's been a real labor of love for most commissioners. We really wanted to produce something that was bold, that was in plain language, and something that really could inspire others to fight for sexual and reproductive justice. There is a lot of important stuff in the report, but I don't have time to cover it all. So I'm gonna pick three main points. So first, in the report, we acknowledge that some progress has been made on some Nairobi commitments, but on balance, governments and international leaders have fallen short. So I think what we're witnessing is really an abject moral and political failure that has resulted in eroding services, in lost financing, and in diminishing political accountability for sexual and reproductive health and rights. Second, as a commission, we really concerned that, while countries have made some recent commitments to expanding the reach of essential healthcare services, we actually haven't seen any real allocation of new funds. There is a clear failure to strengthen health systems, to make them universally accessible, and to treat comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights as an essential element, as the Nairobi commitments expect us to do. And worse, actually, some international donors like the UK have made radical and unjustifiable cuts. But last and above all, the Commission strongly believes that accelerating the achievements of the commitments depends on people fully claiming sexual and reproductive rights, making justice the goal, putting rights at the core. These are the first 2 points of our call to action. But we also call on people to think differently, to reach farther, and to tell a new story. If there is one thing that the Nairobi Summit showed us, is that there is enormous global support for sexual and reproductive justice. So given that this is the will of most people, we need to be more assertive in pushing against what is a minority opposition. We need to use sexual and reproductive justice as a rallying cry, that can instill new energy, that can foster new alliances, and can inspire people's movements to support a call for sexual and reproductive justice, especially the members of the next generation. Agency and bodily autonomy is what most people want and what all people deserve. So we hope that the report provokes thought and action and really allows us to make progress on the road from Nairobi, marching, as you say, to a future where rights and choices are no longer denied.
Thank you, Director Sarah. I really would like to commend the work of the Commission. I have a question for you, if that's okay. Do you mind an impromptu question? That's fine.
No, of course not.
Director, how do you feel about how do you feel about the Commission's constituents, and is there room for improvement on representation within the Commission?
Look, Sonali, I serve on a lot of advisory body, and executive bodies. The high-level commission, the most incredibly diverse group I have served on in all kinds of different ways, from age to race, to gender to religion. And I think is what makes the commission so rich. I love, the passion, the experience, the diversity of backgrounds, as I was saying before, of my fellow commissioners has been a fantastic journey of learning for me because, of the very different, points of view and experiences that are represented on the commission. There's always room for improvement, but I think it's a pretty good starting point.
Yeah, I think, even the output, you are embracing principles of intersectionality, which for the first time, I feel like in a UN report, it's fantastic to see. And yeah, I'm very, very excited for more output from the Commission to keep ICPD relevant and alive.
Same here. We just need to inspire, movements, people's movements to come with us. It's not just for the Commission. The change is going to happen, as I was saying, if we all do it collectively. So
yes,
we need more young people.
We need the fire. We need somebody. Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna move on now to. I'm really thankful, Director Sarah. We're gonna be moving on to our next segment, and before that, I just want to quickly mention that IPPF has been really busy working, helping us at grassroots level keep track of how far governments are at realizing their commitments. They've published last year a database where anybody around the world can search for what it is that their national government is doing with regards to their Nairobi commitment. It's per country and per theme. It's a key resource to hold governments to account and to keep their promises. I invite you to use these important tools, which the link should be in the chat right now. And in addition to the IPPF database, they've also published an analysis of these national commitments. And I love to mention a young activist when they're working hard. So one of the authors of this report is actually a fellow SheDecides young leader, Emer Sparks. Close to you, Emer. The link of her report is also in the chat. Please use these resources and hold those governments accountable. Like Director Sarah says, we need to set the fire at a country level as well. Speaking of accountability and governments, or the lack of, I would like to zero in on one particular government and how it has this ripple effect. And I really want to focus on this because it's impacted a lot of our decisions at a country level. SRHR is dramatically being threatened and impacted by the 2021 reduction of the United Kingdom's development funding. IPPF has applied to bring a legal challenge to the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office over the UK's aid cuts, which was rejected by a judge. This work is heartbreaking and it's important, and I would like to introduce someone who's working so closely with this cause, Becky Ashmore. Please, could you share us a brief of what's happening with the UK ODA cuts?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonali. Yeah, it's been a pretty emotional and difficult 18 months working on this. The UK aid cuts have had a devastating funding on SRHR funding this year, and the future is still incredibly uncertain. And as we're talking about the commitments made at Nairobi, I think there's no doubt the impact of these cuts will slow progress towards those commitments. As many of you know, the UK has been on a bit of a political roller coaster over the past few years with Brexit, and it hasn't really stopped over the past year. So I thought I'd give just a quick background, because I know there's many non-UK people on the call. So the UK has had a Conservative-led government since 2010, but they've actually only held a significant majority since December 2019, just after Nairobi. And that's resulted in some quite big changes in direction. Also, quite importantly, the UK has historically been a really significant donor to overseas development assistance, and this has had cross-party support for many years in Parliament. And the UK first met the 0.7 gross national income target to ODA in 2013, and it's actually been a statutory duty to meet this target since 2015. Which means what's happened since has been quite dramatic. So the cuts were announced in November 2020 by the Chancellor and the Treasury, and this was a temporary reduction to the proportion of GNI, so that reduced it from 0.7 down to 0.5%. In real terms, this means that the ODA budget for 2021 will be 11.1 billion, which is down from 15.2 billion in 2019, so almost a third cut. And while the rationale given by the government is that this is due to the economic impact of the pandemic, there's quite significant political decisions behind this and positioning to the right of the party, which we can't ignore. The impact of the huge cuts has been exacerbated by the speed and nature in which they were enacted, as it was both an immediate cut and, as we're all very, very aware, in the middle of a global pandemic. To complicate matters further, there's been shocking levels of transparency by the UK government on the details of the cuts and the decision-making processes behind them. We're over a year since the first announcement of the cuts, but we still have very little details on the exact cuts which have been made. But based on the information which we do have, which is mainly from organisations and agencies that receive aid and therefore aware of the cuts, SRHR funding has been one of the worst hit areas. UNFPA Supplies, which is the largest provider of donated contraceptives globally, has had a devastating 85% cut. So that means for the promised 154 million, which is expected this year, will now be 23 million instead. And flagship UK SRHR programmes across the world have been drastically scaled back, and many of them closed years early. Analysis by the Guttmacher Institute has shown that the cuts to family planning will result in 9.5 fewer women and couples receiving contraceptive services and supplies, and this will lead to about 4.3 unintended pregnancies and 8,000 more maternal deaths this year alone. And we can't forget that behind every statistic is an individual whose choice has been restricted with potentially life-altering consequences. There's huge backlash to the cuts from across Parliament and civil society, and between us, we've used every tactic we could to try and stop them happening. You mentioned the IPPF legal challenge was the most recent one, and although we came quite close, we didn't succeed in stopping them happening. So what next? The political rollercoaster keeps going. We have a new Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, who oversees the development agenda, and she's been in a role since September. She's held the domestic women and equalities portfolio since 2019, which she's keeping hold of in this new role. And so far, has seemed keen to put gender equality high on her priorities at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. In recent weeks, she's made a commitment to restore the Women and Girls budget to pre-cuts levels, which is a huge announcement. But the details of this are still quite unknown at the moment, but we're advocating hard for SRHR funding within this and for them to return to previous levels. And of course, we'll continue to work closely with global partners to keep the pressure up on the UK to return to 0.7 and to keep its promises and commitments that it made in Nairobi and many other global spaces.
Thank you, Becky. I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear those figures, but what's even harder to think of is they're not just figures, right? They're lives and people and their potentials. I have a quick question for you too, if that's okay. I know personally that like research struggles to be translated into advocacy, and as you know, the Commission has a lot of power, a lot of yielding power and convening power as well. How do you feel the Commission, and I hope, Sarah, you're tuned in, how do you feel that the Commission should, what is the role how do they fit in, and how do those reports fit in holding countries accountable and making the research that you are doing and what Good Mark is doing translated into effective advocacy so we prevent this sort of backsliding that we're seeing?
Yes, it's a very good question and not an easy answer. One of the core UK commitments that was made in Nairobi was their commitment to UNFPA supplies, which was a huge commitment over 5 years, which they have cut. I think it's working now to try and work out what a return to those investment levels looks like for the UK, and the pressure from external parties, from the Commission, is incredibly useful, as is kind of accountability from other donors. We work through the Countdown 2030 Europe Consortium to kind of help put pressure on other European governments to help them understand what's happening and put pressure on the UK to return. But it's hard, I think, going through the details and the actual impact that's happening for women and girls on the ground, and telling their stories is the most important thing we can do.
Thank you, Becky. I did promise Ipsita that I would check in on her artwork. So let's take a breather from what we've been discussing now and see. Ipsita, how are you doing? Oh, wow. I love it. I love it. It's amazing. As we move on to the next part, it's, yes, of course, the tragedy of the UK. And I would like to really call it what it is. It's reckless. It's negligent. And what's really sad about it is that they were a part of our allies as we made progress in repealing the global gag rule. As SheDecides, we're working towards that. And it's heartbreaking to see the sort of 360 on an ally. And I want to quickly touch base with that, the global gag rule, the progress that we've made, but also the progress that we're doing to permanently repeal the global gag rule. As you know, it is an example of how powerful the US and international mobilization based upon global solidarity can counteract the most draconian and the lasting threat to SRHR investment, that is the cruel Mexico city policy. And I have to introduce you to Don Laguenes. Am I saying it right? It's unacceptable if I don't, so you correct me.
No, very, very close. Laguenes.
Laguenes, okay. She's the interim executive director and senior advisor of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, one of the leaders on these efforts to repeal the global gag rule permanently. Don, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sonali and colleagues. Hello, everyone, especially our bold young leaders. I'd like to give all of my time to Zuhura so we could just be inspired by her brilliance and all of the other young leaders. So I'll go quickly today. Greetings from Austin, Texas, and greetings from Planned Parenthood President Alexis McGill Johnson, who's sorry she can't be here this morning. You know, for over 50 years, Planned Parenthood Global has supported brave people and organizations working at the leading edge of a locally led but globally connected movement for sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about progress toward the IPCD program of action, and specifically our work to permanently end the global gag rule. We know the extreme harm that is caused by the global gag rule. It blocks healthcare access, stifles local advocacy, and undermines reproductive rights worldwide. People die because of the global gag rule, and it has been put into place and then repealed with each change in US presidential political party for nearly 40 years. And that just, you know, has a boomerang effect on all of the people and patients and providers working around the globe. So Recently, within the first few weeks in office, President Biden did rescind the policy, but that threat of reinstatement by a future president continues. So that's why Planned Parenthood and so many partners are pushing for permanent repeal. And we finally have an opportunity, a narrow window here to accomplish that in the coming months. So the US House of Representatives has already passed a funding bill, and that's where it happens in our government, that would permanently repeal the global gag rule. In the US Senate, we have a bipartisan, both of our large parties, Republican and Democrat, bipartisan majority support for ending the global gag rule for good. And they have also included this policy change in their version of the US government funding bill. We've got the White House on board. Just last month, the first ever US national strategy on gender equity and equality highlighted the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to end, as you say, Sonali, this draconian rule. Our Congress has until February 18th to finalize the bills that would end the global gag rule. That means the next months are urgent for advocacy at every level in the US and globally if we are to permanently end this cruel and dangerous policy, and then rebuild the partnerships, address the longstanding inequities, and make sustainable progress toward our sexual and reproductive health and rights goals for all. Of course, this opportunity does come at a difficult and regressive time for abortion access in the US. In September, my home state of Texas passed one of the most extreme abortion bans in the United States. And just last week, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments regarding severe abortion restrictions in the state of Mississippi. And this case is very likely to lead to further loss of access in nearly half of our states. This is a pivotal moment. Planned Parenthood and Planned Parenthood Global continue to fight everywhere for the fundamental human right to access abortion and to bring forth the world envisioned in the High-Level Commission's report. No exceptions, no exclusions. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Dawn. It's really inspirational to hear from you. And I just really want to just take this moment to thank you for all the work that you're doing on abortion rights. And I speak for all of us young activists that are working on this space. It's just amazing that you're working to improve the international access to SRHR investment fully. And we're fully aware of what is happening domestically in America and how painful that must be. I mean, we're aware of how painful it is just by watching it. So I can only imagine what it feels like on the ground. So more power to you. Oh. You have my love. You have my support.
Sonali, I think the one thing it does is, obviously, we wish on no one a regression of their access and to sexual and reproductive health care, but it does connect the US more clearly to what's happening and has been happening to people across the globe. And so I think there's been a wake-up call in the US that this is something we have to be committed to, not just for ourselves, but everywhere. And so a greater level of solidarity, I hope, going forward.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Now we move on to the second part of this event, which will consist of a dialogue about the call to action between the SheDecides 25 ranked to 25 young leaders and some of the high-level commissioners. I would like to introduce you to the ICPD high-level commissioners. You've already met the wonderful Sarah Pantaliano. She's the Chief Executive of the Overseas Development Institute. I would also like to introduce you to Lawrence Kabisale, the President of the African Youth and Adolescents Network for Eastern and Southern Africa, and the chair of the Youth Steering Committee at ILGA World, Martin Karadzkov. And finally, definitely not the last and not the least, the last but not the least, Director General of the IPPF, Alvaro Bermejo. And the discussants are, hi everybody, welcome. The discussants are the SheDecides 25 to 25 champions, Christine Sarr from Senegal, Gisela Foz from Brazil, and Monica Carneiro from Portugal. The floor is yours. Unmute yourselves, have a chat. This is meant to be a chat between friends. Come on, let's do it. Monica, do you want to go first? Yes, perfect. Thanks, Sonali, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation, and I hope that we can now gather some useful insights in this piece. So I found personally that the intersectionality when it comes to the analysis it made. And it was something surprisingly and positive that I found in it. But within that, I have some questions that really target the intersectionality between sexual reproductive justice and LGBTQI plus people and also COVID. So first of all, in the report, we see that the protection against hate crimes is red in all the country areas. This for me automatically makes me think of the LGBTQI plus population. Also, we have a youth that has been impacted more than ever by lockdowns and a global pandemic, have an impact on their and their ability to for their development, organize for power. So on this youth and LGBTQI plus lens, I would love to hear your thoughts on it, Martin and Lorenz. Maybe Martin, you could go first.
Sorry, yeah, it's been 2 years and I still cannot unmute myself. Hope you can hear me. Yeah, no, I think the intersections between LGBTIQ people and SRHR have always been clear for me, but unfortunately in the SRHR space, and we know in the ICPD space, the LGBTIQ element and rights was missing for a really long time. And that's what something we raised in the Nairobi Summit. It was that LGBTIQ young people were really invisible in particular and were sidelined for years in the program of action. And it was considered as too sensitive, too political to be discussed and addressed in those spaces. So I'm really pleased to see we are moving forward and we are speaking long overdue to have conversation about the impact, particularly on LGBTIQ people. When it comes to the impact of COVID, as I mentioned, even prior to the pandemic, we know that LGBTIQ people faced inequalities in every single country on this planet. And from the harmful practices, from conversion therapies to intersex genital mutilation, IGM, to violence that LGBTI women face, and it can go on to also the social and economic challenges they face, from disproportionately represented in homelessness, youth homelessness. In some cities across the world, is over 25% of homelessness is of LGBTIQ young people, of mental health and other services. And then pandemic happened and exacerbated all these inequalities and made them worse for many LGBTIQ people, and particularly for young people, because we know that actually, in general, youth civil society is really underfunded, voluntary-led. But for LGBTIQ young people and youth civil society, that's even further impacted. So those service providers who are barely supporting their communities and struggling to support them prior to the pandemic now face that they have to shut down. They have to leave many young people trapped in hostile environments at home with no access to services and provision, and facing really further strain on their mental health and further challenges. And on top of that, we've seen how the pandemic has been used by governments for political gains, to target particularly trans young people and all other LGBTIQ communities for political gains, denying them their basic human rights to healthcare and to other rights. So I'm pleased to see that we have indicators. There's 3 indicators actually in the traffic light systems that are LGBTIQ specific. One is on criminalization, another on hate crime as well there, because there's no way we can achieve through sexual and reproductive health rights and justice without including LGBTIQ people, and without really removing all barriers that exist for everybody, including the decriminalization of homosexuality and same-sex relationships, including the ban on conversion therapies and other harmful practices. But that's I'm taking too much time, so I'm gonna shut up at the moment. For me, the link has always been clear, and I'm pleased that we're taking the right step in that direction to merge that gap that never really existed, because now more than ever we need to work together.
Thank you, Martin. Lawrence, maybe I would love to hear your comments complementing here specific, like how do we ensure the engagement and activism and peace of the youth, especially through a global pandemic?
Thank you very much. So as my colleague Martin is just from saying, yeah, the COVID pandemic has really affected the issues regarding sexual reproductive health and right of young people in general. You know, this has also has done the slowness of international policies commitment regarding to eradicating inequality on accessing informations and services regarding SRHR. Issues at the continental level, let it be at the global level. And for this, we have put much accent on the importance of the R in the issue of sexual reproductive health and right. So R is very important, which is meaning the R of the right is very important for us so that we could reduce a stigma. As Martin is just also from saying regarding LGBTQs, regarding access for young people to information and services regarding their sexual reproductive health and right, but also it's important for us to work also with stakeholders, especially, you know, when we went to the Nairobi Summit, you'll see there is a certain different, or not only for the Nairobi Summit, but also other huge events or summits that we go. So the high level, let us say ministers and so on, they come and get on commitments, but we have to see how us as civil society, us as young people, to advocate on the on how we could be able to bring the gap between and support between the technocrats of the different stakeholders and the stakeholder, because the technocrats will help us push things on forward and how we can work with them to support them on bringing on removing the gaps that's on regarding affecting issues of young people regarding their SRHR, and how we could protect the defenders of the SRHR. You know, it's not only about the LGBTQ, but we also see at even the global level of young people, there are some issues like CSEs that is not yet allowed in some other countries, how we could work with those technocrats from the stakeholders level to advocate and protect the defenders, but also put the much accent on the R of the right of the sexual reproductive health and right. Thank you.
Thank you. You're just in time, Lawrence. I was just about to say, let's wrap it up, but I want to hear from Gisela. This is a very self-aware set of panelists. It's wonderful. Gisela, over to you. What's your question?
So first of all, I would like to say that I'm honored to share this space with you today. And I would like to touch on a couple of matters that the report brought up to our attention, but they're really close to my heart because they're part of my experience working as an activist in Latin America. My first question is, I would like to address to Sara, but anyone that would like to comment on that, is the Latin America as a region is not only home for a great share of the population, but it also has influence in other regions. And there are some exceptions, but currently we are struggling with the conservative agenda and the pushbacks, and they are setting the tone in other places as well. So the report showed that Latin America region has the worst index of funds received compared with requested funds. And I would like to know how you see that information and what we could do moving forward.
Thanks, Gisela. I mean, yes, it's true that Latin America stands out, but I would say that, you know, what we have seen throughout the work that we've done on the report and generally is that, you know, the the commitments to this agenda are so so volatile in so many contexts. Yes, we need to sort of focus on the shortcomings in Latin America, but it's really the global agenda that we need to, to focus on. Because, I mean, as we were hearing from Dawn with, the gag rules and the challenges in the US, it's a political football, that sort of gets used constantly all the time. And, we were discussing, of course, the UK that moves very quickly from being a champion to, cutting funds, so suddenly. So I really hope that the report shines a light on, how fledgling these commitments are, not just in funding terms, but just the political commitments, to uphold these rights. And this is why we've put so much emphasis on, a call for really everyone to try and uphold these rights, to put justice at the center, because ultimately it needs to come, from people's movements, to demand this accountability from governments and leaders to make sure that, this minority that is so powerful in advancing what other people stand for and want and, demand as their rights is, finally upheld. And plus, all the promises that have been made for 25 years that they're actually met.
Thank you. Christine, would you like to ask something?
Yeah. Hello. So sorry, I just take a call, and I thank you for this intergenerational commission, and thank you, Lawrence, to present us. I have just a question. It's about the commission. How the commission is divided to follow up the commitment, and if it has something positive since the commission is here, because I remember that before ICPD we had many activities entitled name Road to Nairobi, and since only we get to Nairobi and made commitment engagement, many of them stopped in Nairobi. We didn't have activity after Nairobi, and yes, COVID-19 has arrived and it has been the priority of government, but women was very affected, because if I take the example of Senegal, we had 1,000 cases of rape during the period of confinement. And I think that it's important for government to protect women and girls in any situation. So I would like to know what will be the role of the commission to remain like government who signed in Nairobi to honor their engagement. So what will be the role of the commission? I don't know if you understand.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to come in, but maybe, Alvaro, Martin, Laurence, this is something we really need to discuss more, because I think we've done a great job. It's the first year we've done all of this virtually, just coming together, learning to work with each other, trust each other, and it's a fantastic group that's come together really well in a short space of time, all virtually. But now we need to think, how we bring the rest of the people with us, and the people who are in Nairobi, how we reach out to them and work with them to also hold governments to account. So I think it's a very good question, and actually good food for thought for us to think how we make sure that our advocacy is really collaborative with everyone else is out there. But my fellow commissioners, I'm sure, have got more ideas.
Yeah, if we could hear from Alvaro, do you have anything to say for this?
Yeah, I'd like to comment, if I may, both on this one and on Gisela's question, because Latin America is so close to my heart as well. But on this, I agree. The mandate we were given initially was to do an annual report that we would put forward and bring others. We know that on its own won't be enough. We have also seen some good examples, Christine, in the report of countries that are already monitoring. Some 20 or 30 countries have put in place mechanisms to monitor their delivery on their own commitment. We need to push more for that, so that goes up to 50 or 60 by next year. We need to also make sure that we use the system, the UN system, even though this was not a UN conference proper, but that we use the UN system, particularly the UPR and the reports on the Sustainable Development Goals, to make sure that countries include a report on Nairobi in those reports. That'll be some pressure that the Commission will be exerting. And finally, I think there are lessons to learn as well from the way the panel that's looking at COVID and pandemic preparedness, they have issued their report. They've continued meeting to look at progress, and then are issuing sort of progress reports following their initial report. And maybe we could do something like that. That's something still to discuss, I think, with UNFPA and the Commission itself, how we could do that. So I think there are options there, but it is a huge challenge for sure. And partly because it's not a UN conference, it's more ad hoc in its reporting. I wanted to say two more things, if I may, in response to Gisela's comment on Latin America. Two important things I think that came into the Commission, and which you see reflected there. One was partly through Latin America, the recognition that the Nairobi commitments are facing an opposition that is better organized, better financed, and more aggressive than it ever has been. And that one of the battlefields where that is playing out is Latin America and the Caribbean, the other big battlefield being Eastern Europe or Europe. It also looked closely into Latin America and how women, particularly young women, have organized in grassroots movements, in the Green Wave, and I'm glad to see Sonali with her scarf, el pañuelo there, how women, young women-led movements have responded to this. And you'll see in the report a strong call to invest more in grassroots movements to counteract this opposition. So those two, I think, were lessons from Latin America and focused on Latin America, bringing that into the agenda as well. And it's worth remembering that that is strategically a crucial region for this fight over the next few years, whether donor agencies are focused on it or not. It is a crucial fight for something that is global. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alvaro. I'm glad you touched on that, because another point that the report brings is the online violence and polarization. And the SheDecides Brazil had an event to discuss gender-based violence in politics. And the elected women present, they raised an important question that what can be done to support those facing violence in the polarized context that we're living in right now. And I'd like to bring this discussion to the panel, considering that Marielle Franco, a Brazilian city councilor, was murdered in early 2018, and her murder still remains unsolved, and that many elected women and activists must flee the country for safety reasons. So how can we build this opposition in a country that is not safe to be opposition?
Yeah, that's a crucial question. You know, the Commission did discuss, for example, the need to recognize SRHR activists as human rights defenders, and to make sure that the protections that are built for human rights defenders are in a way including SRHR activists. I you know, have raised many times how different the response of WHO is when a polio vaccinator gets murdered than when an abortion provider gets murdered, right? And why should it be any different? But it is. And these are really important issues. First, the recognition of it. Second, to document it systematically. And that is really important. We need to do better. Right now, aggressions against SRHR activists are well documented in the US, a little bit in the UK, and hardly anywhere else in a systematic way. We need to get much better at that data. I mean, what Martin was talking about LGBTQI in the report, you know, and how difficult it had been in the past to bring it in. Now it's been easier, partly because of political will, but also because the Commission had access to really good data from the Africa Youth Queer Network, and we need to keep doing that type of documentation as well. And then there's a fight for impunity. I mean, the case in Brazil, we know a few, and there the issues of impunity and in other places are a much bigger question. And that I'm not sure. I'm certainly not a specialist on what we can do to turn that, but we have to keep the pressure on for sure, Gisela.
Thank you, Alvaro. So right now I would like to do another question that is overall related to the pandemic and to the response we saw. And we are aiming for a quick response from your side, or we would still like to touch on this. So during the pandemic, we saw that the essential service guidance for addressing SRHR needs were the last to be put out and were not percentage of the packages out. How does the Commission respond to the failure of global health governance to prioritize SRHR in a timely manner, specifically during a global pandemic? I would love to hear comments maybe from you, Sarah.
Yeah, I kind of hinted to, in my initial remarks, to the fact that I think the pandemic in many ways, exacerbated and entrenched problems that were already there, that were, pre-existing and deep-rooted. It didn't create new problems. It didn't, sort of usher new problems. It just showed how deep, certain issues, certain inequalities, certain injustices were. And the pandemic, in many ways, was used as a pretext, to cut funding, to very quickly cut services, withdraw services, impose restrictions. And as you say, part of the problem has been the weakness of the global governance. I don't think, to be honest, that was just around sexual reproductive health and rights. I think we've seen an absolute failure of global governance in all sorts of respects. I mean, just look at what is happening around vaccine inequity globally, to see how the solidarity, the global cooperation should in a way deliver has been totally absent for the past 2 years, and we're all paying the consequences globally. So we've actually done a lot of reflection on the crisis of global governance that we see, and right now, quite frankly, I believe that there is very little space because of the absence of political leadership to reshape this global governance, which is why I strongly believe that what we need to do in the meantime is to try and shape coalitions of like-minded and perhaps also less like-minded actors that can work together on shared goals. And that's why I'm so pleased that the report really calls on this ability to work together across all kind of sectors, organizations, individuals, to try and really push for sexual and reproductive justice, because quite frankly, I don't think we can expect global governance bodies to deliver in the immediate futures, but we can't wait. And so we need to make sure that those who really strongly want to make progress come together to inspire others to join the march.
Are we out of questions? This is shocking. Christine, you have time for a last one if you have a quick question and also quick responses, guys. Let's do this.
Yes, I would like to ask something, because we are talking about, yes, COVID-19 was a problem, but I think that it has something positive on COVID-19, because today many of our partners are affected by COVID and they are not able to finance some program. And I think that it's important to have a new strategy. I want to ask to say, for example, in Senegal, we have domestic financing. It's in order to allow mayors to include financing of contraception in their local budget. And I think that it's important to our government to protect us first before having donor or partners. And I want to know if domestic financing is something included in the report of the Commission. So, yes, thank you.
I'll come in on that, Christine, or if anybody else wants, please. Okay. To say two things, I think you're very good to point out that there are positive things that have also come up as a result of the pandemic, and the report does focus on a number of them, be it around health provision, for example, the move towards digital health and towards accompanied self-care, things that need to be built up, new coalitions. All of that is mentioned in the report and some good examples made. The issue of domestic financing is also referred to there, not with a view of replacing global solidarity. That needs to continue, and the report is very clear on that, but as a way of adding to that. And we are convinced, and the report says it very clearly, that there is no essential health services that doesn't include SRHR as part of that basic package. So if we're looking towards universal healthcare, SRHR needs to be part of that package, and it needs to be financed as part of that package, not as a separate item, so to say. The report is very, very clear on that, and the Commission very quickly got consensus on that.
Yeah, I'm loving what I'm hearing. There's a strong push for sort of focusing on national commitments, a lot of appreciation for intersectionality. Lawrence, are there any highlights from your end with the Commission being one of the commissioners in the report? Oh, very quickly also.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to bring also, apart from the financial implication or the financial for the sexual reproductive health and right after this, I cannot say after, during this COVID-19, because we are still in the COVID-19. What also the commissioners also brought in the report is the political space up around the SRHR agenda. You know, we have also some issues of security and the politics of including SRHR in the Women and Peace and security agenda. We also took that into consideration in the report, but I would like also to add on a question that was asked, how we follow up on the implementation of the commitments. I know this as Alvaro and Sarah say that we have to discuss more about this in between the high commissioners, and we had to first work on the report. But which is interesting here within the commissioners is we all come from different organizations, and it's really inclusive, as Sarah said in the beginning. And from our different ways, we could already see how we could push, even if we shall first work on how we could increase our efforts to hold governments accountable and ensure that these political commitments become realities within our countries. But I think all of us, this could help on how we could already work with the different stakeholders regarding our different organizations in the implementation of this. And I think the SheDecides 2025 colleagues who are here, it will be great to go also through the report and also advocate in all high-level positions that you will be in the implementation of these commitments at the country level. So it's by working together, putting our hands together, that we could make this reality within the country level, while between us commissioners, and we are trying to find on the strategies of the implementations or the follow-up of the implementation accountability to the governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I actually had a nagging question that came to my mind, and I hope, Martin, you're open to another question. I was thinking, you know, the truth is, I find that these reports, they come out and there's a lot of bang about it, and sometimes they tend to fizzle out. The interest on these issues fizzle out. So what is the Commission planning to do to keep our eyes focused on the goals at hand?
I think it's a great question. It's like we have too many reports that just gather dust, isn't it? And nothing.
You feel my pain, yeah.
Yeah, it happens. I think for us is what we need to. I think one of the key points I'll be bringing to our next meeting, I think, is what is our engagement with civil society, and I think it's something that we can really like step back and think. Yeah, when we were a new team that gathered during the pandemic, and we've had a great impact with this report. But there is an area of, I think, of us looking back as well, is that we need to be more connected with civil society organizations and activists and be able to build that. Because if we don't have those bridges, I think, yeah, you're right, it's just going to be a report that sits there on a shelf, but actually people don't have ownership of it, and people feel like, then it doesn't resonate with the reality they are facing. So I think from my side, my action will be that, to take back and to discuss that with the commissioners, in particular about our engagement. And one example I'll give you is just that recently we had, as part of the Queer Youth Dialogues, which is with the Youth Envoy discussion, we had an event particularly focused on the ICPD on SRHR in an LGBTIQ youth context. And this is just an example of how maybe we can try to do more of those things to merge the conversations.
That is fantastic. I actually think Sadie Brown, one of the 25s, she's a part of that. And I see that you have a lot of work at hand, the commissioners. You also have the Eyes of the 25 on with you right now. Is there something that we can do to continue our feedback to you? And what do you think, what is the question? What can we do as SheDecides to make the promise of Nairobi alive? Just a quick message to the young leaders that are watching.
Reach out to us. Come up with ideas, come up with suggestions, things that we can take on board. We already, from what we were expected to do, just write a report, quite sort of dryly following up on the commitments. We've changed the way we have shaped the report and tried to engage and reach out, more widely than what we were expected to do. So there is a lot of, I think, openness, to doing things differently in the commission. And so, yes, please, come and push us.
I will be more than happy to do that. A little recommendation to the commissioners is create a structure, create a mechanism for us to constantly reach out to you. I think that would be easier for both sides, right? I think.
Well, we can take that as a commitment, I'm sure. To at least take it back to the rest of the commission and to the co-chairs. There are two co-chairs, of course, ultimately, to call the shots.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for this wonderful discussion. As you see, there are endless questions, endless recommendations, and we love to hear from you. So thank you for making this space for youth accountability. It's really been such a pleasure to listen to. Thanks again for everybody participating in this dialogue. We have loads to do and loads to achieve on realizing sexual, reproductive and health and rights for all. We've been through a lot in the last 75 minutes. But before we wrap up, I just have some homework for everyone watching. And there are 4 key takeaway messages that I want you to have with you. If I could just pop up the slide, it will make my explaining just a lot easier, I think. The first homework is read the first annual report. Of course, you have to read the first annual report and the key recommendations from the High-Level Commission on the Nairobi Summit. The second is search the database that IPPF has put forward. It's a great mechanism, a great resource for you to keep your governments accountable. Reach out to your governments and see what they have done to implement their commitments 2 years after Nairobi. Explore what you can do to hold your government accountable. And like we heard from the Ambassador Martin, it's everyone's responsibility, even at an individual level. So before we leave, I promised Ipsita I would give her the opportunity to show her artwork. Ipsita, where are you? How's the art going? Ipsita, I'm dying to see your art. Oh, there it is. Okay. Thank you so much. What a wonderful illustration. You can find more of Ipsita's art. The link is shared below. Please follow, like, share, subscribe to this wonderful young artist. And I think this is my time now. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you all for joining me. And before we leave, I just wanted to say, donor countries, governments, organizations, if you think it's hard working right now, imagine how hard it is to live in this reality, knowing fully well that it could have been different if these promises were kept. And as we started off the day in Zuhura's word, I would like to use those words to close off. We're not the generation that will allow dreams to drown, not in the promises that were never met. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you soon. Bye-bye.